Will it ever end? Ukrainian President Zelensky's military wants to mobilize up to 500,000 more men to fight in his war against Russia. Now, at a news conference in Kiev this week, Zelensky said his commanders were seeking, quote, nearly 500,000 new individuals, and that this was a sensitive and costly issue.
The European Union Council has adopted a 12th package of sanctions against Russia, focusing on a Russian origin diamond import ban, as well as imposing additional import and export bans on Russia.
Stateside, some Republicans are still pushing restraint on further arming our ally in Eastern Europe. Let's watch what Ron Johnson had to say this week.
Every day that goes by, more Ukrainians die, more Russian conscripts die, and I take no joy in that, and more Ukraine gets destroyed. So end it. Stop adding fuel to the flames. I mean, I don't like saying I'm not going to like the result. We're not going to like the result. But every day that goes by, the result gets worse and worse and worse. Recognize that reality. If there's a problem in Washington, D.C., is just the denial of reality. I'd say that's the main problem with liberalism. They deny the reality of human nature. But in this case, I mean, we're just denying the reality of the situation, fighting a proxy war. And it's Ukrainians that are, and Russian conscripts that are suffering. And we glibly talk about, no Americans are dying. Well, God, other people are. Mm-hmm. Doesn't that offend you? I mean, I find it's depraved. It's offensive to have people claim, well, the beauty of, $60 billion, that's mainly going to go to jobs in America. I don't know. I don't think jobs in America are worth the destruction of a country and the slaughter of people.
Yeah, some wise words there. And it's not just that, I mean, the $60 billion, it gets spent in America among specific industries. So it does, it stimulates economic growth in some places. But if that money was just spent in other areas or frankly, instead of the government spending it, was people had $60 billion more dollars in their own pocketbooks to buy homes or buy groceries or invest in their business, that would also be economic opportunity. So merely like shifting the money into one specific industry is good for that industry, but it's not like on net economic growth.
Yeah, I much prefer redistribution that's based on need as opposed to funneling it to the defense industry, because the defense industry manages to revolving door itself into politics and be, the Secretary of Defense after you previously served on Raytheon's board.
And then they blow stuff up, which is destructive.
Exactly.
So if you spend it on things that, if you spend it on not blowing things up, then you have the economic growth, and you have whatever the money, if the money was spent to build a bridge or whatever it is, that's all to the good. It's spent to dig a hole and then fill in the hole and then make another hole.
Do a green transition, fix the infrastructure, do the kinds of things that China is doing to prepare itself for the next century in which it's going to trounce the competition. Yeah, I agree with your redistributional tendencies there, Robby. And look, the writing has been on the wall for a really long time. I see pattern now about who's trying to withdraw themselves from their previous unconstrained support for the war in Ukraine because they can see the writing on the wall. They can see political support dissolving. You immediately, in the wake of October 7th, saw that there was a new war in town with Zelensky trying to go to Israel. Link
the two things together.
And being told, no, you're not, this is not for you, don't come. He got Kamala Harris, do not come. And, it is sad. I mean, it is true that America bragged about the efficiency of using Ukrainian bodies to fight its proxy war with Russia. And I think the Ukrainian people should also have a lot of frustration with Zelensky for going on along with that very obvious project for reasons that obviously had very little to do with protecting the interests of the people of Ukraine. If we go back and back and back to what preceded this conflict, we can have a conversation about Victoria Nuland and America's machinations to make sure the leader of Ukraine was somebody that would go along with our bidding. And this is what you get. It's not the people of Ukraine's fault that they're in this situation. And certainly they didn't deserve to get invaded by Russia. But we have to keep in mind is that there was a peace deal on the table about a month after the invasion happened that would have left Ukraine in a better position in terms of territory lost and certainly lives lost than we are in the position we're in now, almost 2 years out from the conflict. And the people who are responsible for scuttling that deal are the United States of America and the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, and here we are, still paying for it, still naively thinking maybe that this is going to lead in the policy direction we want, although now there's reason to presume, I think, behind closed doors, the administration has conceded, although it knew all along, its own intelligence officials telling both U.S. policymakers and Zelensky and his generals from the beginning that this was going to be an uphill battle at best, that their plan was not solid, that they actually clashed with Zelensky over what he should be doing with the support we were giving him. And here we are. The naive belief that this would end with Putin's government being toppled. We see what's come of that. Putin is in just as strong a position as ever. I don't know what new sanctions are going to do other than attempt to further immiserate the people of Russia. I mean, they've weathered them perfectly without much problem at all. I mean, I've seen arguments that they're in like better shape than they were before.
I have as well.
Which is, again, is not surprising. Where is this? Show me the evidence that sanctions have this long and established history of resulting in the policy outcome that we want. When sanctions get applied, then we get the government we want, or we get the package of policies that is favorable to the U.S. It never seems to happen to me. So I don't understand why we'd expect it any differently this time.
I mean, the posture that America has taken toward Ukraine and all of the kind of self-righteous bloviating about the need to defend the great people of Ukraine and then having an about face like this also undermines our credibility more broadly in geopolitical conflicts. You position yourself as the policeman of the world, the great humanitarian, the person who's going to intercede on behalf of wronged people. But there's a viral clip going on around right now of Karine Jean-Pierre from October 5th talking about how cruel and inhumane it is that between 50 or 60 Ukrainians were killed in a Russian bombing, how grievous and horrible it is, and how it demands America's support for Ukraine, because 50 to 60 people were tragically killed by Russia in an air bombing in Ukraine. Of course, in the 2 months since then, we've had 20,000 people killed in air bombings of our very close ally Israel of Gaza. And there's been none of the same hand-wringing or tears from the podium. Remember, there were literal tears from the podium from, I think, John Kirby as he discussed the genuinely tragic civilian losses in Ukraine. So both backtracking on Ukraine, having a different standard for Ukraine and the people of Gaza, all of these things go further to undermine our credibility on the international stage. So no wonder in the wake of this crisis, in the wake of Ukraine, you see a realignment happening with the parts of the world that are tired of being controlled by the moral tyranny of the United States of America, where we don't have a moral leg to stand on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine, and I think it's welcome to express moral support and solidarity and to condemn brutality and tyranny and invasions. But that doesn't, and it comes from a different school of foreign policy thought than the one that dominates in Washington, that has dominated the Republican Party for 20 years and is kind of somewhat fallen out of fashion and has come very much to dominate the Democratic Party as well. The idea that the U.S. government is obligated to do something. The U.S. taxpayers are obligated to pay something to manage these sectional conflicts half a world away. That somehow this involves our foreign policy interests and is what's keeping us safe, is to fuel these conflicts without actually resolving them. Just keep them going, keep them hot. That is somehow serving American foreign policy interests. It's not something that people believe. They've never really believed that. But it's something our foreign policy consensus has strongly believed since 9/11, frankly.
Yeah.
And it has been repudiated over and over again. The American people do their best to try to repudiate it at the ballot box, but it is hard to do. It's a multi-headed hydra that regardless of what power is in control, it comes back. Even candidates who run as seemingly principled anti-war. Barack Obama was a constitutional scholar who claimed that a lot of the architecture of the war on terror was illegal, violated the Constitution. I mean, you could take the position, ideally it's good, but it violates the Constitution, so we can't do it. And yet comes into office and continues, if not escalates, so many of those very same things. Yeah. And then that makes the American people very disillusioned. Well, if that guy, who actually did articulate when he ran, that's why he was so popular, an opposition to that, and we put him in charge, and none of that changed. Maybe some other things changed, but none of that changed.
Yeah. Yeah,
what
absolutely.
are we supposed to do?
And in this situation, we talked about this a little bit in the youth segment that we did, there really is no mainstream candidate that I think you can argue would take any different position right now with respect to the escalations that we're seeing now in the Middle East.
Not in Israel, maybe on Ukraine.
Maybe on Ukraine.
Yeah.
But certainly not in the new war, and certainly not also with Taiwan. Remember, we saw so many people who were critical of our investments in Ukraine saying basically, and this is, I think, the kind of Tucker Carlson wing of this argument, that we're basically saving up our energies for the real battle, which is going to war with China in the South Pacific. All right, stick around. We're rising right after this.